great question, actually. I just had a student at one of my school visits in Singapore ask if I would, if I had the chance, if I would go back and change like Throne of Glass or like my earliest writing. And my answer is kind of like yes and no. Like as a writer, like as a professional writer, one of the things that like is a blessing and a curse is that with the editorial process that I go through, which is basically I write the first draft of a book, send it to my editor, and then she and I have like a almost year-long back and forth process where she gives me notes, I fix the book, send it back to her, she sends me more notes. And if left to my own devices, I would just keep editing a book forever and ever. But with the way the editorial process is, like we have like a hard like end date where if I don't make that date, the book will not be out on time. And for me, having grown up with Harry Potter, I know how horrible it is to wait like years between books. So it's been really important to me from the get-go to make sure that my books come out like on a fairly like strict like every year schedule. And now that we've got 2 series out, it's like 2 books a year, which is really intense. But so like if I had the chance, I would go back and change things in like all of my books. But like I think every writer would do that, and that's why like once it's done, like it's done. Like I can never change it. Like maybe in like 30 years we'll have like the like re-released like brand new Throne of Glass edition. But I think like in terms of how my writing is like changed, you know, every book I learned something new about myself, not just as a writer, but also as a person. I learned something new about my characters and my world, and I've been working on the Throne of Glass book since I was 16, and what I originally wrote when I was 16 was like horrible, like really bad. And I worked on roughly like the first 3 books for about 6 years throughout high school and university. And then by the time I graduated from university, I decided I needed to rewrite like everything I'd written because I'd learned so much about my writing and myself and what I wanted to do with the series in those 6 years. And to this day, I'm still in a constant learning process. I like to set goals for myself to make every book that I put out there, every book that comes out, like the best book I've ever written. I want to keep pushing myself with every book. And so when people ask me, what's your favorite book in the series? Like my answer is usually like the current, like the book that's coming out next, because I feel like that's probably the best representative of like the growth that I've done as a writer. And I really hope that for the rest of my career, I'll be lucky enough to keep publishing books and keep growing as a writer. But it never like stops. I've never like felt like, oh, I'm like done. Like, you know, I'm like a master of writing. Like every time I draft a book, I'm like, this is a joke. Like you are a joke. This book sucks. No one will like this book. I'm working on the 5th Throne of Glass book right now, Empire of Storms. Yeah. Oh my God. You have no idea the anxiety that I had. I have the biggest mouth ever. Like if you tell me a secret, it will be so hard for me to keep it. So just the title reveal pressure, like on my phone, I had the 2 graphics like side by side, like the like teaser graphic and then the Empire of Storms graphic. And when I posted the teaser graphic onto Instagram, I was like shaking like a nervous chihuahua that I was gonna post like the title one by accident. Thankfully I didn't, but it was so hard for me to just like not even casually be like, oh yeah, like can't wait to share Empire of Storms with you guys. Which was so much pressure, But yeah, when I like now that I'm in the process of like editing that book, like every time I like open it up, I'm like, this book sucks, it's horrible, no one will like it. Which every time I go through that like panic, I have to remind myself that that happens with every single book I write. And I always get to a final point in that editorial process where I'm like, you know what, this book doesn't suck and I actually kind of love it. But this like the suffering and agonizing, it always happens. It's pretty miserable state of mind to be in. Ooh, that's a great question. I was really lucky where growing up, my parents were big readers and they always read to me. And the stories that I always wanted to have read to me every night were fairy tales. But my parents also didn't want me just reading the classic European fairy tales, so they got me folklore from around the world. And there's a Russian folktale called Vasilisa the Beautiful. and it's about this like young woman in this like horrible family that gets like thrown out by her stepmother into like the Russian wilderness, and she like wanders through like the forest, and she's about to die, and she finds this like horrible little witch's hut, and that's owned by this woman named Baba Yaga, who is like a very famous character in Russian folklore. And I took a class in college. I've loved fairy tales and folklore so much my whole life. I took a class in college on Russian folklore, and it is just like this wealth of like really interesting characters, like Baba Yaga, who actually inspired the witches in Throne of Glass. Baba Yaga sometimes has like iron teeth. She like will either help you or like eat you. She's like a very like nuanced, interesting character. And I would love to write like a retelling of Vasilisa the Beautiful. This like young woman goes head to head with this horrible witch, and it's an awesome story. And I would love to incorporate some of the other Russian folk tales, but at this point, like I don't know like what I would like. I have to figure out like what the right retelling. Like sometimes like I love folk tales and fairy tales, but like I don't like the story has to like sing to me. And sometimes like out of the blue, like an idea will hit me and it'll be almost like turning on like a radio, and I can just like hear it like loud and clear. But no, I haven't heard that story yet. But if I'm hoping I one day get the idea for that. It's a combination of, okay, do you guys know the term like pantsers and plotters? Like when it comes to writing, I'm like a hybrid of that. I like to, when I sit down to begin a book or a series, I like to know how I want it to start and how I want it to end. And for me, I need to know that ending bit, both in terms of the individual books in a series and then in terms of how I want the series to end, because that is the guiding star for me. And then I like to know some of the big, like, awesome epic events or like romantic events. So I kind of like will have a vague idea of where I want the books to go, the series to go. But then the other thing I really believe in is listening to my characters and letting my characters guide me. And sometimes I've planned stuff and I started writing it and I either just became not interested or it just didn't fit. And then I will like look at like, okay, why did I stop like being excited about this? And it's usually because the characters stopped speaking to me. I stopped hearing them in that moment. So I'll like backtrack and I'll be like, okay, well, like what would like Selena really do? And sometimes that like will take me in a whole different direction, and it will wind up making the series like that much stronger and more interesting for me. Especially when it comes to like with the romance in the series. Like I hoped I had a ship in mind that I wanted to one day get to, but I also wanted to let her guide me, and I didn't want to like force her into like boxes of, you know, like you have to do this and stay with this guy and this guy. I really trusted her, and she wound up in the place that I had planned and hoped for her to get to eventually, but I let her speak to me, and I feel like with that, it's one of the things I'm proud of, that she kind of has a romantic life that's kind of like what we have in our world. Like it's funny because like my husband was actually my first and last boyfriend, so I feel like I kind of fall into a like a YA like trope, but I do believe deep down that, you know, we are allowed to like date as many people as we want, and we can have relationships, and those things can fall apart and still mean something and change us in a significant way, and we can still go on to have friendships with the people that we were close to. So when it came to Selena, it wasn't really my goal to like do that, like not in like a preachy way, but she wound up, just because I let her have free reign, she wound up doing that. And then also just taking me to cool places in the world that I never saw coming. All of the novellas, I'd kind of planned for those. I kind of knew what happened to her before she fell into slavery, but I never really knew the scope of her adventures. And her getting shipped off to the desert was kind of me listening to like what Arobin, her master, would do to her. I never really saw that one coming. So that was, I like to just like plan, but then also like do spur of the moment, like sit down at my desk and find out, what are these crazy characters gonna do today? Which is sometimes like really horrible things, sometimes really sad things. Lots of those in Empire of Storms. I'm so evil. Oh my God, it's so hard for me to talk about this book without like spoiling anything, because there are so many secrets. I wrote ACOTAR in 2009, before I ever sold Thorn and Glass. I had signed with my agent at that point, but she went on maternity leave before the book ever went out to publishers, and so I found myself with like a couple months of free time, and I got the idea for ACOTAR, and I wrote it, and then I wrote the second book actually in this like fit of inspiration, and then I spent several years revising it, but I've like kind of known for a long time like what I wanted to do with this series, and because I had that time, when I eventually sold ACOTAR to my publisher years and years later, I was able to really like plant lots of secrets and layers into ACOTAR that I don't think readers will like quite see coming. So it's really hard for me to talk about this book because especially, I mean, like you guys can tell from the summary, Feyre goes to the Night Court, and that is a place that is like layered with secrets, and I don't want to spoil things for you guys. I can't even, in the States we're doing this exclusive scene in the Target edition. I can't even talk about the characters that are in that scene. I'm sure it'll like somehow wind up, like someone will find out. But it's a book where you, a lot of the old, like all the old characters come back, but there are a lot of new ones. You get to see a lot more of the world of Prythian. One of the things that I love that we've never really talked about is the map in ACOTAR. It's pretty blank if you look at it. And from the get-go, I wanted that to be an intentional thing. And with the map in A Court of Mist and Fury, when you get the book, you'll see that it's filled in a bit more. And when the third book comes out, you'll see that the rest of it will be filled in as well. And the map from the start has been this reflection of Feyre and her scope of the world and how much she knows about it. So with the second book, you'll see all these places, and then you'll like maybe get to see some of them, hear about the others. So it's like we're not doing arcs or anything for that book, so like no one will have read it like when it comes out, which is like scary for me, because like usually I can get a sense of like how you guys are feeling about a book, but this will just be like everyone in the world at the same time. So I hope you love it as much as I do. It's like there are like some like action sequences that I am like obsessed with that are like sort of disgusting but also really fun. And then there's lots of sexy times. Like this book is like, I feel like the tagline should be like, now with 400% more sexy times.
Then you love it already.
Yeah, except my family cannot read this book. I have told my parents, you are banned from reading this book because I will not be able to look my grandma in the eye ever again. The best writing advice is probably not about technical writing. It's more about what it means to be a part of a community of writers, and I am where I am today because other writers reached back to me when they were in positions of success. They never said do this, it was just something that moved me so much that I decided that any chance I get to give back and reach back to aspiring writers, that's something I want to do, because it's like a circle and a chain, and we're all connected. And when I first finished that giant rewrite I did after 6 years of working on Thorn and Glass, I rewrote every single word. I sent the book out to a couple agents, and I got like 3 rejections immediately, and I was like so heartbroken. And I got an email out of the blue like a couple weeks later from someone who had read my story online when it was on Fiction Press, and the email was basically, I read your book online and I loved it. Are you thinking about getting it traditionally published? Because I am now a traditionally published author. My name is Mandy Hubbard, and I would love to help you in any way that I can. And this was from an absolute stranger, someone who just read my story online. We'd never interacted. And I wrote back to Mandy saying, yeah, I'm trying to get published. I just sent it out to agents. I got rejections from everyone. I don't know what to do. And so Mandy offered to read my pitch letter to those agents. And I sent it over to her, and she wrote back saying, well, you got 3 rejections because your book is 240,000 words long, and the average young adult book's around like 85,000 words. And she offered to read the book for me to give me some feedback, so I sent it to her, and I didn't hear anything back for like months and months. And I kind of like assumed like, all right, I guess she hated it and it sucks and I should go like walk into the street and die. But then I got another email from Mandy like out of the blue, and Mandy said, well, the bad news is that this book is really long. But the good news is that this book is amazing. And part of why it took me so long to get back to you is because I could only read it during like the 30 minutes to and from work on my commute. And during those 30 minutes, I was editing the book for you. And I found 100,000 words for you to cut. Here are my suggestions. I think the book is much tighter this way. And so I looked at her edits, and they were all brilliant. I accepted like all of those changes. So I wound up with a book that was around 140,000 words, which for fantasy, you can get up to like a longer length. And so I sent the book out to a new batch of agents. I got my agent out of that batch, and I think I would have had the drive to get published no matter what. But I don't know if Throne of Glass would have been the first book that I wound up publishing without Mandy's kindness and without her reaching back, with nothing to gain from it whatsoever. So like that was never like a bit of advice, but it set the bar. Like I set the standard for what I wanted to be as an author if I ever got to that point in my career. So the writing community, especially young adult, is very giving, and it's really an honor to be a part of that. Ooh, no one's ever asked me that before. It's really hard for me to explain like the technical parts of my writing, because so much of what I do when I write is just based on a gut level of listening to my characters. But I think when it came to creating Selena, she both walked into my head fully formed, and I had to figure out at the same time who she was. Like, she was like a full person who walked into my head, but it took me years of writing her to get to all of her secrets. And so when it comes to creating like a, you know, nuanced, fully formed character, I don't like to like check off boxes. I like to think of them as a person, as someone full of contradictions, likes, dislikes, starting from like the very smallest details of like, what kind of food do they like? Like, there's like a reason why Selena's like so obsessed with food. It comes from me mostly, but I've done like a lot of thinking about, you know, like if she could like chill like for the night, what would she eat? And obviously that's like chocolate hazelnut cake. That's her favorite thing. And so like little things like that, because, you know, like we're such a product of like our daily routines and like the people that we see and how we look at the world. So I try to bring those things into creating my main characters. But then also sometimes it takes just writing the first draft of a book. Like with Feyre in the first draft of ACOTAR, she actually wasn't an artist. That whole component wasn't in the book, and it wasn't until I sold the book to my publisher and I worked with my editor that she said, you know, we get like deeper into her character. And so I thought about Feyre, and I read through the manuscript, and I started noticing the way that Feyre described the world. And she always noticed like light and texture and color. And as I went through the book, I realized, oh my God, she's looking at the world through an artist's eyes. She's reacting to the things that you would pick out. And I realized, oh, Feyre is like an artist who's like had to give up that part of herself in order to make her family not starve to death. And once I figured that out, it opened up this whole part of her and really let me get into the, you know, like giving up your artistic passion and that part of yourself for the people that you love. I mean, that just was a gateway right into the heart of this character. So sometimes it takes like writing like a couple drafts of a book for me to even like understand who they are. And so, but again, like that was there all along, and I just had to like listen and look at what I'd written and just kind of she guided me. I just like wasn't picking up on it for a while. You know, it's kind of like the last question, like when it comes to the like creating these like there's the term like a strong heroine that's like thrown around a lot in YA, and I think that in some regards it's kind of become warped to just embody like the physically capable heroines. And when I use the term like I want to write strong heroines, I mean I want to write women that are real people. They don't just like fit into these like cardboard cutouts. I want to write like women that, you know, have strength of different kinds, because sometimes I think that I always think that there is a strength in kindness, in selflessness. I think that sometimes the quietest people can be the strongest people who have stories they've never shared before. When I wrote Queen of Shadows, Elide Locken, she is not physically capable. She is like actually physically handicapped, and she has learned to be strong both emotionally to cope with a horrific situation in her life, but also to rely on like other strengths, like her mind, her observational skills. You will see a lot more of that in Empire of Storms. And so like I want to write strong female characters that represent different kinds of strength, because I mean, I grew up with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's one of my favorite shows ever. And one of my favorite characters was Willow, who was the wallflower. She was pretty much invisible in school. She was soft-spoken, but she had a strength in her kindness, in her love for her friends. And then she became like a super powerful like witch who like threatened to destroy the world. But so Buffy kind of like set the standard for me in terms of bringing in a cast of interesting women. So when it comes to writing my own female characters, I want them to represent a wide range of different types of strength. And Selena, with her physical skills, that kind of came mostly not from me like wanting to be like, let me show like, you know, like how girls can kick butt and like cash in on some kind of trend. Like I was writing her from 2002 onward, before the Hunger Games, before any of that stuff. And I wrote her because when I was growing up, I was obsessed with like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and like I wanted to be like Luke battling Vader. I wanted to be Han Solo, and I didn't see enough heroines getting to be in these epic situations and like save the day. And so when this assassin walked into my head, I knew that she would be physically capable of being thrown into these epic situations and not like dying, which is like sometimes like, you know, these like you'll go through like a training montage and suddenly you're like a super warrior, which like just no, that's not what would happen in real life. Like I've been like working with like a personal like trainer at the gym for like about over a year now. I'm still like so weak and pathetic. like a 2-week training montage. No, like you would like die. So with Selena, I wanted her to have that like background of physical skills, so I could like hit her against these like crazy like monsters and horrible things, and have her do all this like badass stuff and like realistically survive. So like that was mostly like why she was like physically capable, but also because I wanted to have more stories where the girls got to like you know, kick ass and take names, because that's always like fun for me. Like Mad Max. Have you guys seen Mad Max Fury Road? Furiosa. I've been waiting my whole life for Furiosa, so I still get like amped up on that, like, you know, the physically strong heroine, but I always want to write different types of heroines as well. One of the things that I have to do before I ever even start writing or like start working for the day is I listen to music that I think like correlates with like my character's current like headspace, and I like sort of like not like meditate to it, but I will like listen to a song again and again until I get into my character's mindset, which I think Air of Fire is probably the most like dark emotionally I've had to go, and so I found myself like listening to Kanye, like these 2 Kanye songs like on repeat to get into Selena's mindset at the beginning of that book. But the other thing I had to do, and this is, have you guys read all the books, the whole series? Okay, so so with Crown of Midnight, what happened? Okay, you're plugging your ear. Okay, all right. So after Crown of Midnight, after Nehemia died, Nehemia's death really like broke Selena's heart, but it's that moment when she turns back and stabs Archer that breaks her as a person. Like that is like one of the ugliest moments in the series. I mean, like he deserves it. He absolutely deserves it. But that is kind of the moment when it snaps her completely, because she does not care. She has lost all sense of compassion of who she is. And so when Air of Fire begins, she is very much emotionally broken. She blames herself for what happened with Nehemia, and she also is facing a world in which someone that she had become very close to is now gone. And even though I was listening to this music over and over again, the thing I had to do to get into her mind space is imagine a world where my best friend didn't exist. And that was the most brutal, horrible thing, and opening myself up to that emotionally, just like it felt like I was bleeding all over the page. But then as Selena emerges from that dark place, because of her relationship with Rowan, who also is coming from a really dark, really broken past, I drew on the power of friendship, of the impact that the friendships in my life have had on me, and how they have fixed things in me that I didn't know were broken, how they made the world a better, brighter place. So I had to go through that entire emotional arc with my characters over and over again. And anytime I write a sad scene, I joke about like enjoying the suffering of my readers, but I cry and I cry and I cry. When I wrote the final novella where Sam dies, I never had done this before, but I had to get up and walk away from my desk over and over again. Not just because I was sad about Sam, but because I was heartbroken for Selena, and going through that and like opening myself up to that sort of loss was devastating for me to go through. And so like I suffer alongside my characters because I have to get into their heads and I have to feel everything they're feeling. And when I write, when I revise, I have to do it in a linear fashion. I can't jump around from scene to scene. So every time that I revised Air of Fire, I had to start on page 1 and get to that dark place emotionally and go through that whole arc and come out of it again, which was so exhausting. And I do think that Air of Fire now occupies a really special place in my heart. I love every book that I've written, but that one, I opened myself up in ways that I hadn't done before, and I pushed myself in ways I hadn't done before. And not to like terrify you all, but like Empire of Storms, cried a lot with that one. But I think it's because I do love these characters so much, and if I didn't love all these characters, I wouldn't feel the things I do, and I wouldn't be able to write their stories. But it's always a little like emotionally exhausting. I called Air of Fire like the migraine book because I cried so much that I had a constant headache while writing it. But I'm really proud of how that turned out. So I already mentioned this like background that I have in fairy tales and folklore from all over the world. So with ACOTAR, it's like set in sort of like a UK, like Ireland-ish place, but I didn't want them to be like the fairies in that world to be limited just to like European fairies. So I looked into like different like monsters and like different like types of creatures from all over the world, and I just like wound up in like a Wikipedia like spiral where I just like got deeper and deeper, and like hours have passed. I had no idea what was going on. Like the Naga in ACOTAR, these like serpentine creatures, like they're like a part of like Hindu like mythology, and I just like I took the kernel from that and then like made it my own, and I've taken bits and pieces from like other like fairy stories, and then I've also made up stuff on the spot. In A Court of Mist and Fury, there's this creature called the Weaver in the Wood that came, I don't even know like where in my like effed up head that thing came from, but in looking at the scene, it's kind of inspired by like Hansel and Gretel like type stories, and like so sometimes like the fairy tales are like ingrained in me and they make their way onto the page. Sometimes I create my new mythology, but if you look at some of the very earliest forms of like fairy tales, like they're really dark, and like the fairies in them are not nice. Like they are like built to hunt and kill you. Across the board, you have the Kelpies in like some of the like English, Irish, like Celtic mythology that are like these like beautiful like horses that like lure you to your doom. Like they have like statues of them in Scotland, and it's like, oh, it's celebrating like murder horses. And then in Russian mythology, you have the Rusalka, who are these beautiful young women who just like sit by these pretty forest pools, and like you're so drawn to them, and then you go up to them and they drag you into the water and drown you. You have a similar thing with the sirens in Greek mythology, who like drive men crazy and like want to just kill all the time. So like I had no interest in writing like sweet little fairies. I wanted to write about like murder fairies because that, like with Feyre as a protagonist, like she is helpless in ACOTAR and going up against these like horrible creatures. So that's like fun for me. And so now that like with A Court of Mist and Fury, you'll see like Feyre is now like kind of on like a more even playing field. Like she's Fae now. She's got some like skills of her own, which like opens up a whole new realm of possibilities for like the kind of creatures I can put her up against and have her realistically survive. So you'll see some more like horrible things in May.
love it.
You know, it's amazing to me that the fandom has grown in the way that it has. And I said this earlier this morning, actually, but I feel like a lot of that is because of the Filipino readers who, you guys have been so vocal and so supportive of this series, and like just in going online and talking about it and making like beautiful edits and stuff, and just like you guys have played such a big role in the way this has grown on a global level. Since becoming a New York Times bestseller, you know, things have changed and also not changed. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I still sit at home and I write my books and I like walk my dog and like pick up her poop. Like, just, I do not become like a glamorous celebrity type at all. But then like when we go to events, it's been like amazing that like I had some events when I was first starting where we had like 5 people in the audience, and now we have to cap events because otherwise, like, you know, I would be signing for 18 hours, which is amazing that there's like that many people interested in the series. But it's just been like crazy to see this happen in the span of just a few years. And you know, like from a very early age, my dream was just to see my book on a shelf in a bookstore. That was the one thing that, like, at the end of the day, at the end of my life, if I accomplished that, like, I told myself that was all I wanted. That was the only thing I wanted. Anything else would just be, you know, the icing on the cake. So to get the call that I had become a New York Times bestseller, that was a dream that I had like quietly, secretly hoped for, as I think most writers do, but it was also something I didn't see coming. And my parents have always been really supportive of my writing, but when I was in college and I was saying I want to be a full-time writer, you know, like, they saw me living in a cardboard box under a bridge. And I would get into these like fights with them about, you know, like, you have to get a full-time job, and I'd be like, you don't understand my dream, I want to like be a full-time writer. And my parents were absolutely right to be concerned like that. But when I got the call that I was a New York Times bestseller, and I finally got to like call my mom and tell her the news, the first thing my mom said to me was, I regret ever telling you to be realistic about your expectations for yourself, which like meant, it still means the world to me. That my mom said that she admitted that. So becoming a bestseller, you know, it's been amazing, but it also has not changed like who I am. You know, getting to go on tour around the world, like, that like blows my mind. Sometimes I'll be on a plane like going to somewhere and I'll just start crying, because that's like, everything that's happened has just been beyond what I ever hoped for. And I have had to set new goals for myself, because once I reached that dream of seeing my book published, like, what then? I had to, you know, set new expectations. And you know, it's, I don't like, I like to think that, you know, I have not changed, but you know, to be honest, the publishing industry is tough. It's a really hard industry. I've known some very, very talented writers who wrote brilliant books, you know, and they either didn't get picked up by a publisher, or, you know, like their first book came out and, you know, nothing really came of it. So I know how tremendously lucky I am to be here, to be able to write full time. There's not a day, not even like an hour that goes by that I do not remember that, and I am not phenomenally grateful. And so being a best-selling author, it definitely, I mean, that is, you know, having that on a book, that is a kind of security in a way. Like, that is something that writers hope for, I think, because it means it might get a little less hard to like be able to do this for a living. So every moment of every day, I just, you know, I can't believe this has happened, and I don't think I'll ever stop being grateful for you guys and for, you know, all of it. Not to get like very emotional. Sorry.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'm like the biggest fangirl of so many fandoms, so like I totally like understand like the intensity of like the way people, the way you guys ship characters. Like, I get that. Like, I'm the biggest fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and like Zutara was my ship. Like, I am on this ship for the rest of my life. Like, you can bury me on this ship. So I get it. Like, I totally like get like why you guys feel the way, and like it's so cool to me. Like, people are like so intense about the ships. But when it came to like to Dorian and Selena, to like Kale and Selena, like I knew like where I actually like wanted her to get to, because during those years that I wrote the book on Fiction Press, like Rowan was like a huge fan favorite back then, and he was actually like my favorite back then. But with the story that I was writing back then, to suddenly like add that in. It didn't work. I would actually, this is so weird, but I would actually like write like fanfic of like my own story, like and it was like Rowan Selena like smut basically. Like I've never shown it to anyone. I still have it on my computer. But so I was like my own like secret like shipper of that. And so when I rewrote the series, I wanted to like get to that point eventually. But because I had plans for him to come in so late in the series, and because she was with these like smoking hot dudes, like, and she loves guys, like, so like one of the things that I love to write, like one of the reasons why I love to write Selena's character is that like she is like she sees a hot guy and she's like, well, hello, and like that's like it's fun for me to write that. So with her relationships before Rowan walks onto the page, they were kind of a result of me again listening to her. Like Dorian, like she sees him and she's like, hey, hot stuff. And then Dorian was like, well, hello, hot stuff as well. And then that kind of like, their relationship fell apart in a way that felt natural to me. And then when it came to her relationship with Chaol, that was kind of a slower build that like culminated in Crown of Midnight. And then when Nehemia died, that was such a breaking moment for her. And it put her into such a dark place that she had to then crawl out of step by step. And she, like, I knew in listening to her that even if she one day, like, kind of forgave Chaol's role, which, like, wasn't that big, but even if she, like, accepted that there would still be this glimmer of darkness between them about it. It would still be this shadow. And the other thing I realized was that for Chaol, like he is so noble and he is so self-sacrificing and he has done all of that. He gave up his family, he gave up his title for Dorian, and his arc has always been tied to Dorian. And I believe, and this is one of the things that I'm also proud of with the series, that we have these romantic relationships, but then we also have the friendships that change things and can change the world. And with Chaol and with Dorian, like that's part of one of the most important things in the series, and the thing that ultimately gives Dorian the strength to break out of that collar is when he thinks his best friend is dead. And in Heir of Fire, at the end of it, when Sorsha dies, that breaks Dorian, but the one death that Dorian cannot endure, and he says this in the book, is Chaol's death, and that's what causes him to like explode. So when it came to Selena and Chaol's relationship, being secretly the queen of another kingdom, Chaol, I think, would have picked Dorian in the end. He would have picked his own kingdom, and they would have eventually had to split ways, and they would have been like sad probably, forever about it. But he would have picked his friendship, and he would have picked his loyalty to his friend. Even if Dorian was like, go be with her, Chaol would have stayed because he loves Dorian, I think, more than he loves anyone else. And that's why, like, in that moment when Chaol leaves the castle, the one thing that he takes the time to say is, I love you, to Dorian. And I cried and I cried and I cried when I wrote that moment. And so with his relationship with Selena, I just, I knew that it wouldn't really, I did not see, in listening to the characters and what they wanted for themselves, what they hoped for deep down, I didn't see that panning out. And so I also, with their breakup, it was messy and it was brutal, and they both acted in this like they acted not like themselves. When they like reunite in Queen of Shadows, I didn't want it to be this easy thing because both of them are so stubborn. They are the most stubborn people. And Selena, she was furious about the state of things that she came back to. And Chaol, after what he went through at the end of Heir of Fire, I think it's kind of like unfair to expect not just characters, but all of us in our day-to-day lives to be perfect at every single moment. And Chaol was, I think, entitled to fall apart and to not be the Chaol that we knew and that we love. Because the worst thing, the thing that he had been fighting every day to prevent from happening, had happened. And he was helpless to stop it. And he fell apart. But the one thing that Chaol was not entitled to was to fall apart and stay that way forever. And so with Queen of Shadows, I wanted him to be able to grow out of that. And his path and Selena's path had just taken them in different directions. And there's that scene where they reconcile, that like, I mean, I was crying like happy tears but also sad tears, and that I cry again, like that's why I always have headaches when I write, because I cry all the time. But so with their relationship, I just wanted it to feel natural, and I wanted them to both be able to get to these like dark, horrible places where they aren't acting like themselves and not like the best version of themselves, and to come out of that and to see each other again as allies and as friends. And I think, you know, they'll always be like friends, but his, you know, Kale and Dorian, they're like, you know, they're a match set, and like from the get-go, their relationship was just as important for me to write as any of Selena's relationships with other men and then other friends as well. I love when I get questions about the 13. Like with Heir of Fire, Manon was a character I wanted to bring in actually later in the series, but then I had this idea one day of like what I actually wanted to like get her and the 13 to do later on, and I knew that in order to make that journey like impactful and like as baller as it can be when it happens, I needed to start in Heir of Fire. And Heir of Fire, like if you look at like Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, they're like Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight are around the same-ish size. Then like Heir of Fire is like this big. And my editor actually said when she read the first draft, this book is really long, can we just like cut this like witch stuff? And I was like, no, you can't. Like I went to the mat to make sure that Manon and the 13 stayed in the series and that they could have this journey. But the witches have been these, like they've been exiles for centuries. They've roamed all over the world, and they kind of have like a, bless you, they kind of have a, you know, with men, they see men as like for like food and like the other thing. And you know, if they're like roaming all around the kingdoms, they would encounter people from like, you know, different like, you know, colors and different backgrounds, and I wanted the 13 to reflect those journeys. So you've got Ghislaine, who's, you know, she's black, and she, you know, it's like not even like a thing amongst the witches, like how characters look, their skin color, because they're all used to just being a mix. And I love that I could bring that in the series, because with the way the Empire is, you know, it's kind of, the kingdoms are mostly like have been separate. There's been like a bit of mixing, but with the 13, it all of a sudden opened up all these possibilities for me. And then with the gay characters in the 13, you know, I wanted to have, like, I want to include as many different types of people as I can. And I really, on like a storytelling level, I love the idea of these two lovers and the 13 that have like had each other's backs for 100 years, and that, you know, will like die for each other. Like it's like a very like romantic type of love that I just like, I would love to like be able to like write Thea and Kaya's story one day. But when I decided, like with the witch mythology, I used to be like big into like Wicca when I was a kid. Yeah, I had like a little altar in my room. I was like a wannabe Wiccan. Like you know, like the real religion is something that's like really cool and like special, but like I was like a wannabe. I watched The Craft, you know, that movie, and I was like, I'm a witch now. So I had like a little altar in my room with like candles and like little figurines, and my parents were like, okay, whatever. Like they did not care. They're like, you're still Jewish. Like no one. So I like actually like knew a lot about, you know, like covens, like real world covens, and like they're usually like 13 members, and I thought like, what if like Manon just had like a coven, like the witches societies built into like these covens and then these clans, and what if the 13 members are just known as the 13? And I was like, and actually the number 13 terrifies me. Like I will avoid the number 13 at any costs. Like it wigs me out. So I like, the witches are supposed to be terrifying, and somehow like in writing about the 13, it like freaked me out enough that like I think I was able to inject that level of like terror into them. But I basically just wanted to have this like group of like witches that were like badass and dynamic and like could do whatever they want. And I like, when I knew what there were gonna be 13 members, I made a list like 1 through 13. And I thought about each character's name. I like figured out the names, and then I figured out their histories. And you guys because the books are now like so long, I can't be like, and here's a side story with Edda and Briar. Like, but I would love to be able to tell those stories one day. You get to, I mean, like, of course, Manon and the 13 are in the next book. When I wrote Asterin's backstory, I didn't see that coming. I knew that I had known for a long time that Asterin will play a big role in that like baller epic moment that I have planned. But then I didn't know her motivations for what goes down in that future scene until I got to writing Queen of Shadows, and then there was Asterin telling Manon her horrible story. And I think I can't even, like, I'm like literally like trying to like rein myself in because I can't talk about what happened to Asterin because I don't know where that came from. And again, it's like I feel like a broken record, but it was just me listening to my characters and hearing her story for the first time. And it just was like, some people have asked me to write like that like novella of like Asterin and like her like hunter dude, and I can't. Like, I cannot write that. It will, like, I think that would actually, like, break me as a person in a way that, like, writing, like, The Assassin's Blade, like, it didn't, you know, like, it does not end well, that story, and it's, like, it's too sad for me, and I think it's a story that Asterin tells beautifully enough on her own that, like, I like to leave it to the readers, but that broke my heart. Poor Asterin, oh man. I think I already covered this, but thank you guys so much for all of your support. Oh my god, so many of you have your phones up right now. I said it before, but you know, the Filipino fans, like, you guys have championed this series for years, and so much of the growth that I've seen in the fandom is because of you guys shouting online from the rooftops about these books. So much of what's happened is because of Lou, who is amazing. She's an absolute star. She is like really rallied the Filipino fans, and you guys are just so generous and so giving, and I do not have words to express how grateful I am and how much it means to me that you guys like wanted me to come here, and I'm so grateful to the National Bookstore for bringing me here so I can meet you guys face to face. And like, I know it probably sounds like really trite, but like I do love you guys, and I am just beyond grateful for all that you've done. So thank you. Thank you.
We love you too.